and welcome to another episode of Never Mind the Dam Busters with me, Jane Gulliford-Lowes, and alongside me is my co-presenter, James Jeffries. As ever, we continue to take a deep dive into the rich, complex and often controversial history of RAF Bomber Command. So James, how are you and what have you been up to this week?
I'm good. I had quite a big meeting for my PhD, my biggest submission yet, and they liked it. So I'm still riding on that.
Yeah, of course they did.
You always get a bit anxious about these things.
That's nailed on. Could have told you that.
Yeah. What else? Marking, writing, and I'm also rereading the Dam Busters at the moment, the Paul Brickell Dam Busters book. So it's just been very interesting. I must do that. Actually.
I've got a very old copy somewhere that I must reread and see what I think about it now. Yeah.
I've got quite a few thoughts, but how about you, Jane? What have you been up to?
I've just come back from Norway again, of course, but I had a very, very interesting day in Oslo last week. I went to the Fram Museum and the Kon-Tiki Museum. So the Fram is the ship which Fridtjof Nansen used on his Arctic explorations and which also took Roald Amundsen to the South Pole, to Antarctica. So that was really, really fantastic. The Kon-Tiki is the raft that was built by Thor Heyerdahl in the 1940s to prove that people could have sailed on balsa wood rafts from the southern shores of South America to the Pacific Islands. So that was fantastic. But the absolute highlight of this trip, right, just out the back, there's a memorial to World War I seamen, sort of merchant navy, that sort of thing. And it is a World War I mine. So there was I standing, having a look at this lovely mine, as you do. Wrong sort of mine, obviously, naval mine.
Yeah.
And this lady came up to me, this Norwegian lady came up to me. She said, "What is it? What is this?" I was like, "Lady, it is your lucky day." I can see her glazing over after a while, but yeah. Anyway, so that was fun. Keeping with a nautical and keeping with a Norwegian theme, the other day I went to see the SS Hestmanden, which is currently, or was then, moored up on the quayside at Newcastle upon Tyne. And the Hestmanden is the last surviving Arctic convoy ship from the Norwegian merchant fleet, from Nortra ship.
Wow.
And it's still seaworthy, obviously, and it took part in the Liberation Convoy, which was a small convoy of ships which sailed from Norway on the 17th of May, I think it was, to Shetland, and then all down the north coast of Scotland, and I think they were going to Liverpool as well, just to sort of commemorate the Shetland bus trips. It used to go backwards and forwards in the fishing boats between Norway and Shetland, and the contribution of the Norwegians to the Arctic convoys and Allied warfare generally. But it was really, really interesting. It wasn't that big, really. And I thought, God, I wouldn't have liked to have been out in, the middle of a storm on the Atlantic in this. But the stories and stuff were absolutely heartrending because so many of the crews were just teenage boys. And I'm talking like between 14 and 18. And oh my God, it was absolutely heartbreaking. But really good experience, and so glad I went to see it. And apart from that, I've been doing Preparation for my talk to the Royal Aeronautical Society this coming Tuesday about Bomber Command in the Battle of Britain. Well, it's supposed to be that, but it's actually, of course, it's going to seg into mine lane, of course. But anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. Looking forward to that. And Vicky Taylor's on the same schedule.
Talking Luftwaffe, I imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. And Paul Beaver and another chap whose name I can't recall at the moment as well. So looking forward to that. So let's get on with it, shall we?
Yeah, there's quite a few themes there actually linked to our guest today, who we'll introduce, Chris Sams. Chris studied history at King Alfred's College, specialising in the Luftwaffe and the Axis powers at war. Always one for all things boats. His first book was German Raiders of the First World War. His second book, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot today, was entitled Flying into the Storm, RAF Bombers at War, 1939 to 1942. I first met Chris at a Great War Group conference, and I had read Flying into the Storm during my MA in 2015, 10 years ago. That's crazy. And it certainly played a big part in my growing interest in the early war bombers, which, I think, Chris, we spent a large chunk of the conference talking about all things fairy battles, Hamdens, Blenheims. So I'm very excited to say that you're joining us today to share your thoughts on the role of RAF Bomber Command in the early days of the war, and also a little bit about the Luftwaffe as well. So, Chris, it's wonderful to have you join us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. And saying that, when you write, you always hope that someone's going to enjoy it. So thanks. You're literally the only person who really enjoyed the storm. So
Really?
I think there's been a couple of people, but yeah, it was really good to hear that someone enjoys your work. So no, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, very, very, very much. I've got a warm spot for this era, the early war bombers, that I think is totally overshadowed. You think of Bomber Command 42 onwards, but yeah.
No, exactly.
Chris, you must be my absolute ideal podcast guest because we get ships and we get bombers. I mean, what more could I want? This is just like absolutely in my element. It really is. Just before we began recording, I was just saying I cannot believe that Chris and I have never actually met in person before, given our many overlapping interests, but hopefully we will rectify that in the not too distant future. So anyway, Chris, can you tell us where your interest in the early war bombers actually comes from?
Well, basically, I'm a mercenary. Will history for money. After I finished writing Raiders, my publisher... Yeah, well, yes. We've got to eat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But when I finished writing Raiders, my publisher phoned me up and he said, what do you want to write about next? And I said, I've got absolutely no idea. And he said, well, there's a bit of a market for early war bombers and the RAF. And I thought back to when I was a kid, I built a Blenheim 4, I think everyone does. And I have a real soft spot for the ferry battle, as well as things that are broken and unloved. And I thought, yes, this is right up my alley. I don't like glamorous stuff like Lancasters and Spitfires. Let's grab, and I grabbed it with both hands and ran with it.
Excellent.
And really enjoyed it.
So do you want to just give us like a little potted what Flying into the Storm exactly is and what it covers?
Oh, God, yeah, it covers quite a broad stroke. But it follows the majority of bomber aircraft that were in the RAF on the 3rd of September 1939. The Blenheim, the Hampden, the Whitley, the Wellington and the Battle. Their use in the campaigns in Europe through to the Channel Dash in February 42. I also cover, because Bomber Command is just the stuff based in England, but I thought, well, what about Blenheims and Wellingtons abroad? So I also look at the deployment to Libya, Greece, Burma and Malaya. And there's some things that I'd never heard of, such as Haddock missions, which it takes up like a page in the official history. And I thought, why has no one ever heard of Haddock missions? I mean, they're absolutely amazing. You get Whitleys flying through the Alps, and the Alps, the mountains are higher than the ceiling of the Whitley. So they're flying through the dark up alpine passes. It's just absolutely amazing. You also get Blenheim-supported blitzkrieg in the desert against the Italians. With a certain amount of meddling from a certain prime minister. I won't go into a Kenneth Mars-style rant about Churchill, but I also tried to give an overview of strategies of the campaigns and how they played out. But also, more importantly, I really like the personal experiences of the air crews. I think that makes the story more human and more relatable.
Absolutely.
You can sit around, talk about dusty maps and aircraft designs, but when you're saying Sergeant Johnson was under fire and the engine blew up, and it just makes the whole thing more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite a sort of tricky balance to get right, that, isn't it? Sort of relaying sort of historical factual information, interpreting that, theorising about it, but then also combining the human stories with it as well. I think it's quite an art, isn't it?
Absolutely, especially when they get things wrong.
Yeah.
You get, even in the reports, people make mistakes.
Yeah.
Just like in the Battle of Britain ones that say they were engaged by Heinkel 112s. It's like, no, you weren't.
Interesting.
Or in Malaya, they talk about being attacked by Stukas, which is absolutely bizarre.
Gosh, yeah. They must have had quite a range.
Or a bit lost.
Or a bit lost, yeah. Can you tell us a bit about the nickel raids, first of all? And then you also have a chapter on gardening, don't you, good man? One of the few people who have actually written about it. Fantastic. Tell us about nickel raids first, though.
Okay, so nickel raids start on the first night of the war. So 3rd of September 1939, because we're a few days after Poland. You get 10 Whitleys taking off from 51 and 58 Squadron, and the main aim of the mission is to drop leaflets over Hamburg, Bremen and the Ruhr. The RAF are really hesitant to bomb cities, mainly because they're worried about the bad press that they're killing civilians, but also that there'll be a retaliatory raid against London, or more accurately, France. And the French are very keen not to upset the German Air Force. And so they figure, well, we could drop leaflets, because they implore that it's worked for them before in Mesopotamia and in 1918 against the Austro-Hungarians. So they think, well, if we drop some leaflets, it might try and get people to question what they're doing. And also there's the unwritten threat of, okay, it's leaflets today, tomorrow it's a brace of bombs. It has the same effect as an air raid, because if you think about it, the Germans look up, they see this aircraft going over, you've got to presume it's dropping bombs. So the air raid sirens go off, the searchlights go up, everyone stops work, if they're working late, goes to the shelter, sleep's broken, but you're not actually bombing or killing anyone. So it kind of has that extra effect. They also ask the gunners to look out and plot defences like searchlights, factory buildings, flak batteries. Also very interested in the idea of the Germans having dummy towns. They think that they built these sort of makeshift towns that will attract the RAF's attention. They'll fly to those and there'll be a massive trap of anti-aircraft fire. So they're trying to chart those as well. And also Luftwaffe airfields and keep an eye out for aircraft. It's not an easy mission. Conditions on the flight are pretty awful. You've got strict navigation corridors set up so that you don't accidentally fly over Holland.
Yeah.
On one occasion, squadron leader Murray gets shot down by the Dutch because he strayed over Dutch airspace. They're very, very defensive. So you have to follow these navigational routes, which is really difficult in the dark. On one occasion, it was minus 26 degrees Celsius in the aircraft. There's no visibility. Parts of the Whitley of Flight Sergeant Winton he almost crashes it because the whole airframe gets covered in ice, and that includes the weight from the wings bring it down. I think it's about 10,000 feet. One of the engines stops working. They can't use the wireless because there's sheet ice all over it. The forward gunner is found passed out in his position, buried in snow. It's just horrific. And between the 3rd of September and the 31st of January, you've got 123 sorties, but with the loss of only 4 aircraft, which is really good for aircraft at this time. But in the new year, you get Wellingtons and Hamdens getting involved, and the furthest they fly is Warsaw, which is really quite impressive.
That's pretty long. That's a long way, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for 2-engine bombers. But gardening, let's get to the important one.
Don't set me off.
I had no idea. Well, yeah, I'd never heard of it. As I was studying this book, it was a learning curve all the way. And in the official history, there's a whole section to gardening. I was like, oh my God, why has no one ever written about this? So it's got like the detail of how the missions that were flown, what aircraft they were using, which squadrons were involved, the types of mines, how the mines worked. And I managed to get like 4,000 or 5,000 words together. And I thought, someone should come by and write a book about this one day. And maybe I will one day, and then completely forgot about it. But Jane has, so go and buy her book. If you're listening to this and you haven't bought it, go and buy her book and read it.
Yeah.
He wasn't paid for the plug, honestly. Yeah.
After you bought Red Mine, just...
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an endlessly fascinating topic, I find. But again, it combines that whole thing of the sort of maritime and the sort of aviation as well, which is just right up my street. But anyway.
Talk about the early part of the war. It'll be good to talk about the Battle of Heligoland. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
Oh, gosh, yeah. This was not a good day for the RAF at all. It was for the German press ministry, but I'll get to that at the end. So there's a lot of pressure in the phony war for the RAF to do something. But as I said, they can't attack non-military targets. The only target that is 100% non-military is the German fleet in port. Because even if you hit the dock facilities, technically that's a military target. And also, honest God, we were aiming at the ship and we've hit the port. And if some civilians got killed, sorry, but we were aiming at the ships. It's not like you're aiming for a factory in the middle of a residential area. And so they try to think about the best way to do it. And obviously you can't have a fighter escort. But in the 1920s, there is the strong belief that the bomber will always get through. This is sort of started by Douay and his theories of aerial warfare. And this is then continued by Stanley Baldwin. And the Germans have kind of shown through the Spanish Civil War that modern bombers can smash their way through if you're dealing with obsolete fighters, but that bit's always forgotten. And so they get a group of Wellingtons together, and the Wellington at this point is considered a heavy bomber. Yeah. I mean, she's a thing of beauty, but she can absorb a vast amount of damage with her geodesic hull airframe. Also, they've got a hell of a lot of firepower. The rear turret's got 4 303 guns in it, and the RAF believe if you fly in a group of 6 aircraft, you're all covering each other, you will be able to see off any fighter attack. And so on the 17th of December, Wellingtons from 937 and 149 Squadron take off, 22 aircraft in total, flying in groups of mostly 6 and a 4, and they get right out across the North Sea, and they catch the Germans napping. The Navy radar in the Heligoland Bight reports to the Luftwaffe and says, well, we've got things flying over, we've got something flying towards us, and the Luftwaffe ignore it. The Luftwaffe radar reports it, and the piece of paper goes missing into the filing cabinet, and no one really sort of forwards it on until the Wellingtons are flying over the ships, circle round, drop their bombs, don't do a lot of damage, and then they sort of head off. That's when the Jagdwaffe descend on them with 109s and 110s, and it gets messy. In total, 12 aircraft are shot down out of the 22. 57 airmen killed for the loss of 2 109s.
Yeah.
They found that the Wellington had a very nasty flaw at this point in that it didn't have self-sealing fuel tanks. So if you hit them enough times, they just burst into flames and exploded and went down with everyone. A couple of the squadron formations had got a bit broken up after the attack. I think it was Squadron Leader Guthrie and Hugh Williams. Their 2 sections sped off and they left other aircraft behind. Post-battle, the RAF have a look to see what's gone wrong, and it can't be a planning problem, it can't be an aircraft problem, so who's to blame for this? Hugh Williams and Guthrie. Both of them are dead. They died in the action, but because they'd sped off and left their formation disorganised, they'd allowed the Luftwaffe to take advantage of this. Harris later comes on and says that this isn't fair. He says that these guys had never seen the enemy before. They'd never been engaged, and they'd never really had any formation flying training. So it's not really their fault. For the Germans, this becomes great because in Berlin, they've just held a press conference to admit the scuttling of the Graf Spee to the world. And so they've just had this whole, one of our warships has gone. Yeah, it's awful. And as everyone filed out, someone from the propaganda ministry came running out to the world's journalists, said, quick, come back in. And then they told them about how they decimated a massive RAF raid over the fleet for the loss of 2 1s. And of course, they overstated the numbers. I think they claimed they shot down like 40 aircraft or something. The RAF do continue to carry out armed reconnaissance over the North Sea, but they keep suffering losses here and there, even though they decrease the numbers, and eventually they sort of realise daylight bombings without escort it's not really a good idea.
Now, we've covered the battles of Norway and France and the AASF, and also the role of Bomber Command in the Battle of Britain in previous pod episodes, but I wondered if there's anything you wanted to say about the role of Bomber Command in the summer of 1940. It's a massive topic, this, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys covered it really, really well. So I just think the best thing to do is just to reiterate that Bomber Command is still very much in action, and it isn't all about the fighter squadrons. It's very easy to think, Spitfires and Hurricanes, but the Blenheims are going into action still. Ferry battles are going into action still. Everyone thinks after the Battle of France, no one's using battles, but they're using battles to attack the ports. Well into October 1940. They also give them to the foreign squadrons before they give them proper aircraft, which is a bit unfair. But you also have Churchill kind of demands that the Blenheims go out and carry out operations in the same way that the Luftwaffe have. And so you get the Alberg raid, where all but one of the attacking Blenheims gets shot down. And the one that didn't get shot down had turned around halfway because of engine failure. And they were going to prosecute the pilot for cowardice, but he dies in action before he can, which is absolutely awful. Also, the attack over the Meuse crossings. The RAF, the British Air Component, and the ASF are literally throwing the kitchen sink at the German pontoons and boats. Yeah. But the Luftwaffe just control the skies, and it just becomes a bloodbath, because that's the one where Ugly Barrett, that's his nickname, that's not what I call him, but he locked his office door and apparently had a bit of a cry, which I completely understand. I would have been shattered as well. You've also got to look at the amount of work that the Bomber Command would have had to have been doing during Sea Lion, should it have occurred. The Spitfires and Hurricanes are useless during Sea Lion. It's all going to be about the bombers. They've got to get in. They've got to do as much damage to everything that's going along. And I think it would be easy to say that the casual general reader of the Second World War aviation would say that the bomber crews did nothing during the Battle of Britain in 1940, and it was all down to the fighters, but it's really, really not true.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before, and it was my MA dissertation. The more I was reading about what Bomber and Coastal Command, shout out to Coastal Command as well, at this point we're doing, is incredible. And they were, they're in the Roll of Honour, the official Battle of Britain Roll of Honour in 43 when it's written, and then subsequently just disappear. And it's just like, gosh, let's talk about this. This is massive. Yeah. This is the Battle of Britain,
Well, it's all to do with that kind of falling out of favour, isn't it? Of
absolutely.
Bomber Command. Yeah.
Was it in Churchill's speech when he talks about the few, he means the bomber squadrons?
Yeah, and he talks about them all in it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on then. Chris, can you tell us the story of the Lancastria? I think this was the sister ship to the Cameronia, which I will mention later on when you finished telling us about the Lancastria, because I've got a little story about that as well. But let's hear about the Lancastria.
Yeah, it's before the Wilhelm Gustloff. I would have said that Lancastria was one of the worst maritime disasters in the war. It's absolutely horrific. So okay, everyone thinks the Battle of France ends for us at Dunkirk, but it doesn't. You end up with British forces still fighting backwards. You've still got the AASF still in action. Well, vaguely in action. They're still trying to get their ferry battles up and attack, but it's becoming more and more futile. And so they're falling back to the west coast of France. And mainly they end up at Saint-Nazaire, where it's getting absolutely chaotic. You've got soldiers, civilians, airmen, sailors, Poles, French, British, everyone that can is trying to get away. And the Lancastria is a 1920s Cunard liner, which in peacetime can carry 1,300 passengers. They're literally filling these passenger ships up with everyone. And they reckon the estimates, they don't know how many people were on board when she set sail, but the broad figure is somewhere between 4,000 and 9,000 people.
Oh, God.
Conservatively, they reckon it was 5,500, but they can't be entirely certain because no one's checking paperwork. Anyway, they as they go out, the Luftwaffe attack, and one Junker 88 drops 3 bombs on her, one of them going down the funnel. And she rolls over and sinks in 20 minutes. There's 900 survivors. So even if there was 5,500, you're still looking at about 4,000 odd people dead. Well, the water fills with oil. And then there's people struggling for life against hypothermia, tide, poison from the oil. And it was the trawler Cambridgeshire that picks up the 900 survivors. There are accusations of the Luftwaffe machine gunning them in the water. And I was going to write an article on Lancastria for my Substack, and I started doing the research for it. And I was listening to someone from a British nurse who was in Plymouth, and she was treating some of the survivors, and she said that apparently the Germans dropped an incendiary bomb into the fuel oil to set the sea alight. But I've got to double check that. It sounds interesting, but as I said earlier, I want to be accurate. I mean, I can put it in as an accusation, but I don't know how true that is, so I need to have a look at that. But it's the loss of the Lancastria is a dark day.
I remember first reading about it and being totally heartbroken.
So, with regard to the Lancastria, as I mentioned, I think the Cameronia was one of her sister ships. My grandfather actually sailed on the Cameronia when it was a troop carrier in 1942, taking him to North Africa. And he often told me the story of how they were torpedoed not far off the shore of a place called Bon, which I think is off the coast of Tunisia, before they had time to disembark. And he always sort of played it down and said, it was nothing, it was just a slight damage, people going on ridiculous kind of thing, trying to jump off the ship and all this kind of stuff. But I made my men just make sure that they, stayed in their positions, which if you ever met my granddad, you would understand that. He was not a man to be trifled with. He was a sapper, a Royal Engineer. Where after he passed away, and I was sort of researching his story in a little bit more detail, I discovered that the Cameronia was actually hit by a torpedo from a German dive bomber, and it ripped a massive hole in the side of the ship. I think it was something like 20 metres long or something like that. And there was a number of troops killed immediately and a number of others injured. It was still seaworthy. He managed to limp into port, but he'd never, ever mentioned that bit. Never mentioned it. That's just how he was. He never told you about the bad stuff. He always used to just talk about the interesting or the funny stuff, never about the bad stuff. Anyway, right, let's press on then.
So one person I want to talk about, which we spoke about at the convention, was Charles Lightoller and his absolutely incredible story. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit about him here.
Yeah, Lightoller he's a very interesting character. He's famous for being the second officer on the Titanic when she sank, and the senior surviving officer. For those of you who have only seen the film, he's the guy that points the gun at all the passengers and says, "Get back or I'll shoot you all like dogs," referred to by Billy Zane as a strutting martinet. But that is Lightoller. And he goes on to represent the White Star Line at the American and British hearings and defends the actions of not only the crew but also the company on that night. He comes off very well. You'd think that they'd make him a scapegoat, but I mean, he actually went down with the ship, and he got pushed out. He ended up sort of stuck against an air vent, and a rush of warm air pushed him to the surface. And then he managed to take over Collapsible B, which was upside down, and keep everyone on there as alive as possible. But As this isn't Never Mind the Icebergs, I should really move on. I don't really want to go into too many details, only to say that he did serve in the Royal Navy in the First World War. He was first officer on the liner Oceanic, which was serving as an auxiliary cruiser, when she struck a rock and sank. He then also commanded a destroyer and may or may not have allowed his men to shoot U-boat crewmen in the water. He was also famous for bringing his yacht Sundowner to Dunkirk with his son to try and get men off the beach. And there is a story of one of the soldiers getting on, finding out that he was Charles Lightoller from the Titanic and trying to jump back into the water. One of his colleagues grabbed him and said, look, if he can survive that, he can survive this. Interestingly, though, and I think this is where you wanted me to go, his other son, Herbert, was a Blenheim pilot. And he was involved in the first RAF air raid of the war against the German fleet. 4th of September, force of Blenheims, Hampdens, and Wellingtons all take off to hit the German fleet at anchor. German crews are pretty relaxed. They're far away from England. There's no way they're going to get attacked. The war's in Poland. What's going on? They've got washing hanging up. They've got men just leaning against the bars. They see these three aircraft approaching. Oh, it's the Luftwaffe coming in too low again. We should really, hang on, they're shooting at us. And they come in and drop general purpose bombs, which will do absolutely no damage to ships other than splinter the decking and kill the crew. But that's about it. They 110 Squadron attack in a shallow dive, pass over the pocket battleship Sheer at mast height. 107's Blenheims attack the light cruiser Emden, but they come under really, really heavy fire. Flying Officer Barton shot down by flak. Another one of the Blenheims is caught in its own bomb blast. And Flying Officer Lightoller's heavily riddled Blenheim crashes into the Emden's deck, kills 9 sailors, wounds 20, but kills the entire crew of the Blenheim. The Wellingtons do come in later, but they get bounced by ones, and it's not a great engagement. It's not a great start for Bomber Command.
Yeah,
but it could have been worse.
Gosh, didn't know that story. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
It is, isn't it? It's just really, really incredible. And I think in the newer Dunkirk film, Lightoller, one of the characters is based very heavily on him, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who plays it. Mark Rylance.
I can't remember.
It's Mark Rylance, isn't it? Yeah.
And I just remembered he's played by, I think, Kenneth More in A Night to Remember, the 1958 film.
Yeah.
So just random things that I know. Of course he did. Yeah. We covered 1940. What are the light bombers up to in 1941? And could you tell us a little bit about circuses and shipping sweeps?
Well, the RAF in 1940 failed to learn the key lesson from the Battle of Britain, which is that single-seat fighters operating on their bases will always be more effective than aircraft that are halfway through their fuel. Numbers be damned. You could have 100 Messerschmitt 109s over London. They've still all got to turn around at the same time. And so we come up with the great idea of circuses, which is to fly over to France. We use a couple of Blenheim squadrons to fly over with about 6 to 8 squadrons of single-seat fighters to kind of draw the Germans up and try and decimate the fighter squadrons. You've got the Blenheims coming in at a reasonable height, attacking military facilities or factories. They usually do all right. They don't tend to get bounced that much, but the RAF fighters get absolutely decimated, and slowly at first, and often the Germans just won't engage them. They'll sort of see on their radar sets that there's 50, 60 fighters coming in and just go, nah, we'll let them go this time. Often they'd hit them when they're on their way back, when their fuel's running low. And all those experienced pilots that survived the Battle of Britain, all those squadron leaders who've got aces, are all getting shot down. Talking of Kenneth More, Barder gets shot down on a circus. And
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it doesn't do anyone any good, but still they persist. You've also got the anti-shipping campaign, which starts to become more active in 1941. The Bristol Beaufort has to be temporarily retired because there's a major engine glitch, and so they bring in a replacement aircraft for it, and that is the Bristol Blenheim. Anyone heard of that? So
might have mentioned the months, yeah.
I think they're kind of an obscure aircraft. Yeah, the Blenheims come in and carry out the anti-shipping role, and they're flying in they go out in formation, but then split up to patrol to try and drum up and find enemy shipping, and they're coming down at like mast height to try and drop bombs on ships. And at first, they can be quite effective, a bit more effective than the Beauforts, unfortunately, but they do open themselves up to anti-aircraft fire, and the Germans start putting more heavy caliber guns on their ships and having flak ships as escorts. And much like we had convoy escorts, they start having convoy escorts of 109 and 110s, and a solitary Blenheim coming in at mast height is pretty ripe target.
No chance, yeah.
One example is on the 15th of April 1941, the 1 squadron is intercepted by fighters off Farsund, Norway. They lose 3 of their aircraft. 107 squadron come in to attack the same convoy. They lose 2 of the 6 aircraft, including Wing Commander Birch. A third wave of 4 from 114 squadron also attack this convoy. They lose Wing Commander Robbins and 2 other aircraft. And at the end of the day, no vessels are sunk, only 109 is lost, and the RAF lose 7 aircraft, including 2 wing leaders. It's very brutal. No real gain.
Direct attacks on shipping is just not a good use of resources, is it? Anyway, that's one of my bugbears, but there we go. So how did Luftwaffe defences change as the war developed, Chris?
Oh, they improve exponentially. In 1940, it's very, very basic, and the Luftwaffe are very put off by the RAF raids on their aerodromes. So they increase flak defences. They've got the very, very good 88, which is phenomenal. But the RAF start attacking at night time, so there's not much they can really do about it. After the Battle of Britain, are now available for defensive work because during the Battle of Britain, the 109 pilots, they're really stretched. They are involved in so many operations that as soon as you land, you get told, right, you're going to defend the airfield tonight. Oh, no, I'm not. But when there's no offensive role for them, they can be used primarily in the defensive role. And in 1941, you get arguably the best iteration, the 109F. I mean, I prefer the ML, but apparently the Friedrich is better. And then they get the Focke-Wulf 190, which starts to appear in larger numbers. And these 2 fighters outclass everything the RAF have got in 1941. And it takes quite a lot of, they capture a couple. And then takes a lot of work to upgrade the Spitfire. But for a while, they've got absolute fighter mastery. They've got massive flak concentrations around the most bombed place in Europe, which is Brest Harbour. These are augmented by the 2 battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in 1941, and so they're able to throw up as many shells as possible, and they just bring a fresh 109 squadron down to sit in Cherbourg to help defend it from Bomber Command. Big thing, though, is the Kammhuber line, which provides the radar belt across France and Germany, and it can tell you, because whereas like later when the Americans come along, they fly in box formation, the RAF do the stream. So once the line is broken, you're just going to constantly get aircraft passing over that stream. And so once you know where they've gone, you can vector in night fighters to deal with them. And you've got the Messerschmitt 110, although I think is underrated as a day fighter, which actually does so well as a night fighter, especially when they're being radar controlled, and they just come in and cause absolute havoc. They do develop the wild boar tactic, but I'm not a fan of that one. That one is where Hajo Herman comes up with this great idea of, we'll pick a city and we'll put all the fighters over that because that's where the British will come. Some days he's right. Often they're wrong. All the fighters are in the wrong place. They do get exponentially better up until 1942, 43, but eventually they start to lose the technology war.
There really is so much in this book. And 2 other things I want to quickly talk about is Greece and the Western Desert and what's learned at this point. Can you tell us a little about what the RAF are up to in these campaigns?
I've condensed 4 chapters for but we tend to think the Battle of Egypt being and Libya sort of just being the Africa Corps, Rommel, El Alamein, but it actually starts in 1940 as a defensive campaign because the Italians attack first, and what follows is a blitzkrieg-style attack by the British on the Italians, and it's really, really successful. Especially that if you bear in mind that the RAF in the region, they're really quite neglected because everything's going to the home island. So Africa is always going to be second fiddle. We'll send out what we've got when we've got it, but we need defend England, and then we're doing offences from here. You might get a couple of squadrons. So there's only 3 squadrons of Blenheims in Egypt at the time, and the primary fighter defence is Gloucester Gladiators, which is quite handy because the Italians mostly they've got the 79 bomber, which is pretty decent, and the main fighter is the Fiat Falco biplane fighter. Interestingly, the Blenheim can outpace a Fiat Falco, and it's got enough armour to deflect her machine gun fire. So the Blenheims, for once, are actually fairly safe-ish. Air Marshal Longmore, who's in charge, fights London for supplies and reinforcement, and he's always blunt about his force's abilities. He doesn't say, oh yeah, I'll be fine. He does turn around to Churchill and goes, no, this is nonsense. This isn't going to work, which doesn't really go down well. He's got a great commander of bombers, which is Collishaw, as who's his commodore, and he believes that with the 3 Blenheim squadrons, he can still cause as much mayhem as possible. And they set up this really good army-air cooperation and literally form a blitzkrieg to push the Italians out and then into Libya. But by 1941, Churchill wants the bombers to be sent to Greece because, Greece is an ally. We've got to try and stop the Italians and now the Germans. And Collishaw and Longmore say, you can't do that. These are our most experienced pilots. They're really good. You were taking the sharp end of our wedge away right when we need it. Churchill overrules them and the bombers get massacred in Greece. It's standard blitzkrieg, same as France. They just he's cutting them to pieces and their airfields bombed and the sharp end of the wedge is blunted. Consequently, the Libya campaign starts going wheels up. And so they have to look for someone to block. So Collishaw and Longmore get sacked. Air Marshal Tedder comes in, takes over control of the Desert Air Force, and literally there's already a perfectly working system. He just gives the crews some more experience and he gets all the credit. Everyone talks about Tedder's Desert Air Force. Well, without Longmore or Collishaw, it wouldn't have happened. The big issue is when the Africa Corps turn up and they bring the Luftwaffe with them and you get Messerschmitt 110s and then later 109s and they do start taking a toll on the bombers. There's also, I'd not really thought about this, but there's an interesting problem with bombs in the desert. If you drop a bomb in France or Germany or Kent, you get shrapnel, gravel flying up, and that does damage not only to people but to buildings and windows. You drop a bomb in the sand, it throws up sand, which doesn't do any damage to anything. So they're not quite as effective. They also struggle in the heat quite a bit, like the perspex falls out and things, and the engines get clogged with sand, and they don't have the maintenance repair stuff at first. But the bomber crews really do well with what they've got.
Chris, you finish the book discussing Malaya and Burma. Can you tell us what the bombers are up to over there?
Yes, they get an even worse deal than the guys in Africa because in 1940, nothing's going to happen in the Far East. So they've really not got much out there at all. They do have a couple of Blenheim squadrons. And as 1941 develops, they are penciled to try and attack the Italians. They're penciled in to attack the Japanese landing forces. And they similarly suffer sort of blitzkrieg-style damage in that the Japanese come in and bomb all their airfields and they've got superior fighters. The Blenheim's still pretty good, but against the Zero fighter and the types that the Japanese army are using, they can't really hold up. And if I can just quote one of 60 Squadron's navigators, he talks about one of the raids they do on the beach. And it was, we attacked by flights, each flight choosing its own target. The kill agreed in the squadron was one 8,000-ton ship and 3 fully laden craft. 2 or 3 Blenheims decided to drop their bombs on the transport. We followed in behind and could see that she was red hot inside with bodies sprawled all over the decks. We decided not to waste our bombs on it. We dropped our bombs in a stick across them, but by the time the 20-second fuses had burned, the craft had moved some yards away. We could see the crews firing at us with automatic weapons. One of the boats overturned in the explosion, which followed, and the others must have been badly shaken. It was a near hit, but particularly effective. And then Malaya becomes, as I said, very much like the Battle of France, the enemy quickly gaining air superiority. They decimate the defenders, but they continue to bravely fight on. The Brewster Buffalo, it's a decent fighter, but it's not as good. It's very much underrated, but against the Zeros and the army fighters, it's just not as good. Burma is even worse. They start to rotate some of the Malayan Blenheim squadrons to Burma to rest, only for the Japanese to invade there. The Japanese have also got all the defensive plans for Burma because a German raider called the Atlantis captures a ship off South Africa and they don't destroy all the paperwork in time. And so the Germans capture this report about what's available in Burma and hand it to the Japanese embassy. And the captain, I think his name was Roger, is one of only 3 Germans to receive a samurai sword from Japan. The others were Goering and Rommel because he helped out their invasion plan.
How interesting. Didn't know that. Yeah, that's super interesting.
The weather in Burma is not conducive for aircraft maintenance either because of the amount of rain and heat. And they've also found that the Blenheim leaks like a sieve. And one officer, I haven't written down his name, he used to put an umbrella up in the cockpit to keep water off his face, but the water ran down off the back of the umbrella down the navigator's neck. They do bring in reinforcements from the Middle East, but again, the Japanese attack is just relentless, and the British response is just too slow, which is not surprising because at the same time you've got El Alamein about to happen. The good benefit for the Blenheim was that she had good armour. And they found one of the ways to escape Japanese fighters was to hit the deck and literally fly treetop level because a couple of the Japanese fighters had telescopic sights. So the pilot would have to take his eye off where he's flying to look down the sight to shoot at the bomber. And now, if you're doing 300 miles an hour at treetop level and you're not looking where you're flying, that becomes very, very hazardous. So that was the Blenheim's get out of jail card.
I mean, we're always looking to talk about the Luftwaffe and the German perspective on things. I wondered if there's anything you wanted to talk about the Luftwaffe during the early war period, if there was anything else you wanted to add about them.
Yeah, I try to be very careful when talking about the Luftwaffe. There are a lot of gatekeepers and quote-unquote experts, and they, if you excuse the pun, they will shoot me down in the comments. So I'm going to leave most of it to better qualified historians like Victoria Taylor. She'd be much better to talk about it. However, I am going to throw out chapter 2 of my 20-year-old dissertation, undergraduate dissertation, for debate. Bear with me on this. The reason the Luftwaffe collapses is not due to its own inadequacies, but because of the German army. They're so obsessed with the idea of flying artillery and constantly pooling the number of bomber fleet to form a Schwerpunkt to knock out the enemy on a local level that they're not thinking of the strategic level. And they're constantly berating the Luftwaffe for not having enough aircraft. And then by 1944, there is a need for fighters, and they keep going on about, well, we need bombers. Why aren't you providing artillery support? So I'm just going to throw that out for your listeners to mull over and not at me in the social media. That was 20 years ago when I was 25 years ago when I was younger and dumber.
Do you have any personal stories you'd like to share from your research, or some things that might not have made the final book that you had to leave out?
In my original plan, I wanted to do some of the forgotten offences of World War II, like the Allied attack on Syria, which was supported by Blenheims.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, time and space meant that it just went out the window. And so I never got around to writing about it. And sometimes I'd like to go back and do it, but I don't think there's a market for just Syria. Maybe in like 5 years' time when the book's it's about 10 years old now. But when it's 10 years old and they ask me to update it for the paperback, I might do a George Lucas Star Wars special edition, flying into the storm with one extra chapter and editing out the bit where the Luftwaffe shoot first. Story-wise, there's some great ones. I love the one about the Whitley that landed in France due to low level of fuel.
Oh, yeah.
The crew get out and they approach some civilians and start chatting to them, but they realise these guys don't understand French. Then they see a German policeman. They realise they're completely on the wrong side of the border, have to run back to their Whitley, take off, just as a group of German soldiers arrive on bicycles. There's another one that's running low on fuel, and they kind of ditch it. The crew all jump out. The pilot calls into the intercom and says, right, everybody jump. And unfortunately, the intercom's not working in the tail gunner position. So this Whitley hits the ground and pretty level. The gunner survives the crash, gets out and thinks, oh my God, all my colleagues will be in the burning wreck. So he goes back in to try and rescue the crew. They're not there. He gets rescued by local police, taken to a nearby cafe where the rest of the crew are sat drinking coffee. One of the men has a sprained ankle because he was forced to jump over a fence because he was being chased by a bull, and he was the only other injury.
Wow. That's like something out of other.
Oh, it was. It really made me laugh. The other one is the little known fact about who the first people to bomb a Japanese aircraft carrier was. And it was actually Blenheim Squadron.
Of course, yeah.
So Blenheim's of 11 Squadron, during the Indian Ocean raid, or the Easter raid, you get a group of 11 Squadron bombers operating out of Ceylon. They take off, find the Akagi, which is with her cap patrol, isn't expecting anyone, and suddenly this group of Blenheims come in at low level and start bombing this aircraft carrier, and then turn around to try and leave. I mean, it goes as well as you'd expect. Not only do they get intercepted by the patrol, but as they get back to Ceylon, a group of Japanese bombers going back the other way, their fighter escort descends on them as well. But the Americans can, I'm trying to think of the polite way to say suck it, but it was actually the RAF and Blenheims that bomb the Akagi first. Okay, unsuccessfully, but we did it first, before Midway.
Wow, that's a great fact. I like that.
Some great stories, aren't there? I think now, to ask the biggest question, what is your favourite early war RAF bomber? And if you want to throw in a Luftwaffe one as well, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I'm going to be very sit on the fence on this one. I mean, as I said, I love the Blenheim 4. She's amazing. I had a real soft spot as I was writing about them. However, the ferry battle, I'm very protective of the ferry battle. I have a real love for things that are rubbish and under great losers in history. And the ferry battle,
like me in the Halifax too.
Everyone's. Oh, yeah. Halifax, hurricanes, ferry battles. Not that the Halifax is rubbish, but it's better than Lancaster. But the the ferry battle, everyone says, "Oh, they're death traps." Like, well, of course they are, because they're up against Messerschmitt 109s. How good was the Stuka when it was fighting Spitfires? It's the same thing.
Exactly.
But don't send me down that one. I also built a model of the Wellington years ago and named it after my my then crush. I'm not going to name names, but I really love the Wellington. But if we're going to do Luftwaffe, there is only one answer, and that's the Bf 110 C4B. Without a second thought, love that aircraft. Sadly old enough to have been a kid during the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. And then in the 90s, everyone released Battle of Britain computer games. And I used to play Reach for the Skies and Lucasfilm's Their Finest Hour. And my best friend Dave, he said to me, and we're still friends now, we've been friends since we were 6, but he said to me, the Messerschmitt 110's rubbish. Don't fly that, it's useless. So it became my mission to become the greatest Messerschmitt 110 pilot of all time, and I did. And yes, flying around in a 110, dropping bombs on airfields, and then I went away and learned about Erpo-Bungsgruppe 210 and their raids and Yabos, and it's just my favourite. But there is a new aircraft which is slowly replacing the Blenheim, and there's only, if you were going to improve the Bristol Blenheim, what would you do with it?
Go on.
Make it a Bristol Beaufort.
Yeah.
They are beautiful. Yeah, I do love a Beaufort. Yeah.
I mean, I've actually got an airfit kit I'm holding up with both. I need to get around to making that. Yeah.
I'm buying that at next payday. It's on my list.
Fantastic. I love it.
Someone who I know loaned me a whole load of Beaufort stuff. I think it was from his great uncle who'd been a Beaufort pilot. And there was original photographs of like attacks on German shipping. There was like diary. There was a logbook and all sorts. And I scanned them all. This is a couple of years ago, and I just can't find them anywhere. I don't know what I've done with them. I'm devastated because I'd love to get hold of that stuff again. Really, really interesting stuff. But yeah, the Beaufort is a lovely aircraft, I think. Finally, then, Chris, are there any further books planned, and what other projects are you involved in?
Well, at the moment, book 3 is very, very much in its infancy. It was only sort of agreed on about a month ago with the publishers.
All right,
I mean, I've got till next October to write it. And if you find that stuff, it's actually about Bristol Beauforts.
Oh, brilliant.
And,
yeah. I'll have to see if I can find it for you now. Yeah.
That'd be great. Beauforts, Beaufighters, and I'm going to try and squeeze in Mosquitoes and Wellingtons. I mean, the title is about Beauforts and Beaufighters, but I've got to get in the Tetsi. And they had Wellington torpedo bombers for a while in Malta. And I think this is going to be, it started with a book just before lockdown. Just as my divorce was kicking in, I took my son up to the RAF museum and I bought a second-hand book on 21 Squadron. I was like, don't know anything about this, and this could be interesting. I'm looking for book ideas, seeing as I'm newly single. And I started coming up with ideas, wrote about it, then lockdown happened and the divorce got ugly. And then, I didn't get around to it. But then the publisher sort of sent out an email a couple of months ago saying, has anyone got any ideas? I said, I'd like to write about the Battle of Jutland, or maybe Beauforts. And they went, Beauforts would be good. Like, oh, okay. But then I was reading about it, and much the same way with Flying into the Storm, I've going in not knowing much. So I'm kind of on the journey that hopefully the reader will be in as well. Interesting, scary fact for you, that the Beaufort, the survivability of torpedo bombers in about 1942 was 17.5% to survive one tour. If you did 2 tours, only 3% survived 2 tours. And that's in comparison to the Blenheim squadrons, where it was 25.5% for 1 tour and 6.5% for 2 tours. And it's just, as you were saying about direct attacks on shipping, it's just crazy. But they get involved
suicide,
in the Channel Dash.
Yeah.
Well, the 217 squadron are being penciled in to attack the Bismarck, which is just absolutely insane. So I'm hoping it's going to be really interesting.
That sounds really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely want to read that.
I'll send you the chapters to proofread if you want.
I'd love to. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's exciting. But I mean, Chris, that's absolutely fantastic. And I say, folks, do give the book a read. It's certainly, you've got so much in there. It's very, very thought-provoking. And it is so good to highlight this period of the war and what was going on. Chris, just a massive thank you for agreeing to be on the pod. But we'll have to have you back to talk again. And as you know, I'm always all ears when it comes to early war bombers. So massively enjoyed chatting today, especially when it comes to
having me on.
Pleasure and stuff. It's absolutely our pleasure. But that is sadly all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode or regularly enjoyed the pod, do leave us a review or a star rating wherever you find your podcasts. Please also consider becoming a subscriber for as little as £2.40 a month, which keeps the show going. And to our subscribers, as ever, thank you so much for your support. The link is in the show notes, or visit nevermindthedambusters.buzzsprout.com. Please also feel free to join our Facebook discussion group, which is open to all listeners, and follow us on our various social media platforms. So until next time, bye all.
Bye all. That was fantastic. I think one of our widest ranging discussions that we've ever had. Loved it. See you all again soon. Bye.